Hello, it's Glenn Wolkenfeld, Mr. W from sciencemusicvideos.com or learn-biology.com. Welcome to This Week in AP Bio, the show that's for AP Biology teachers. This episode is about DNA structure and DNA replication, and I'm going to share with you some of the moves that I found that you can use to help make your students' achievement soar. And just to give you a look at that, imagine what it would be like if you were able to assign a homework assignment that brought your students back to you already able to explain what a nucleotide was, or the detailed structure of DNA, knowing what the various types of bonds were and why they were important, or knowing about basic molecular genetics processes like transcription or translation. Or to talk about DNA replication, what if your students came to you knowing the big picture issues involved in DNA replication, but also all of the details, knowing about the roles that the various enzymes played, the helicases, the polymerases, the ligases, the primases, and could really explain to you what was already happening before you began your lesson. Think about the incredible things that you can do. And that's what sciencemusicvideos.com and learn-biology.com are all about. So I'm going to take you through some of the resources that we offer in this video today. But before we did that, I wanted to say thank you. For those of you who are using sciencemusicvideos.com, it means so much to me that you've chosen to send your students to our websites to learn the important biology content that's going to help them succeed in your class and also help them succeed on the AP Bio exam. So thank you so much for doing that. And I also want to thank you because you're a hero. You're doing what needs to be done to support your students in this really difficult time so that they can have a successful biology experience. So thank you again. So we're going to look at two issues. Well, we're going to look at DNA structure and DNA replication, but before we start that, I wanted to share with you two new features on sciencemusicvideos.com that I'm really happy about. They're really amazing, and they're really going to help you increase the amount of learning that happens on our websites. So the first are teacher previews. And what do I mean by that? So here's Science Music Videos, and there's the AP Biology menu. And this week we're talking about DNA structure and replication. And so I'm going to go there, and you can see the tutorials that we offer. Let's go to DNA replication. And, the tutorials work by providing your students with some reading so they have access to the fundamental content, and then that leads to a quiz. And here's the new preview feature. If you log in as a teacher, you use your teacher login that you use to access our teacher portal, quizcards.com/login. Well, if you log in as a teacher, you get this blue triangle menu. And this feature is only available to teachers with a paid account. So you have to upgrade from a free trial to get this. And once you have that, you can preview a quiz. And what that means is that you don't have to do the entire quiz anymore in order to see what your students are going to experience when they do the website, that's a valuable experience. You can click that link and you get this view. So what this does is it shows you all of the questions that are in this quiz about DNA replication. This is kind of a hangman interaction where you fill in the blanks and you get feedback from that. But what you can do is you can click here, questions active, you can show the answers. And so now you see all of these filled in. I'm going to find a better one for you. I'm going to close this and I'm going to go here because that was just the big picture. Let's go here, down to the bottom, and here, DNA replication and some DNA structure. Let's do that one. Okay, so teachers only, preview this quiz. Here comes our preview. Questions are downloading, and now what you can see is here's a diagram, and if you want to show the answers, you can show the answers, and there it is. And if you want to show the actual feedback that we give, There's some of the feedback statements over here. You know that the way our quizzes work is we give hints. We don't give answers, and students have to cycle through this. And this in and of itself can be an incredible learning interaction. Like, for example, one thing that you can do is you can keep the questions active, and you can have this available for your students to see on Zoom or something like that. This is the window that you're sharing, and you tell students to enter into the chat what their answers are. And this is a quick way that you can check student understanding. So now that I've showed you that, let me show you something else. I have, over the past couple of weeks, been putting together timed, secure quizzes. And what do I mean by that? Well, these are quizzes that are timed. You have to open up a timing window for students to take these tests, and they're secure insofar as the questions come down from the server in a way where the questions are random and students can't really see what the questions are ahead of time. So it's sort of a more secure way of checking for understanding. I don't think that the College Board is going to be buying our technology anytime soon, but if you want to give your kids a quick quiz and feel pretty high confidence that you're getting a good reflection of what they're learning, well, this is what you can use. So like, for example, here's a photosynthesis diagram quiz. Now, I'm already logged in as a teacher, so you're not really going to get a sense of this, but if I weren't logged in as a teacher, then I wouldn't be able to access this. And so what you do is you open up a timing window, and then you click Start Quiz. Questions download. And then, you know, in the diagram below, where's oxygen shown? Oxygen is being shown at number 3. All right? So note that you're not getting the kind of feedback that you usually get in a sciencemusicvideos.com question. Let's show you what happens when you get one wrong. So in the diagram below, chemiosmosis is most directly connected to number, well, chemiosmosis is mostly directed to the formation of ATP. So I'm going to put in the wrong answer. I'm going to put in 3 over here. All you get is a no, that's not correct. And at the end of the quiz, the student would get a report telling them how many they got right, how many they got wrong, and in what areas. And again, this is a particularly great thing to do this teacher preview with, because after you do the quiz, you bring up this window, and then you go over all the questions. And you can just show the kids the answers, show the students the answers. Or if you want, you can keep the questions active and have your students answer in the chat. It's a fantastic learning interaction. And in the accompanying email to this video, you can find instructions about how to set these up, how to take care of the timing, and how to do it. So it's a great new feature. I hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing this week with DNA structure and DNA replication. So let's talk about sort of where we are in the curriculum to begin with. So I'm going to go back to our main menu. Here we are. And one thing that I've been talking to teachers a lot about is that in my curricular pathway, I strongly recommend, and I'm going to model doing Unit 6 before you do Unit 5. There are really strong pedagogical reasons, biology pedagogical reasons for doing that. The main one is that it's really hard to understand what a gene is and how genes are transmitted without understanding them on a molecular genetic level. On top of that, we've been in a cellular world through the entire course, you know, cell communication and the cell cycle, and it seems to me to make sense to stay there before going on to a more organismal kind of thing, which is what heredity is all about. So 6 before 5, I hope you follow me in that, and we're going to take that to DNA structure and replication. So DNA structure and replication. Here's our first tutorial, but what I recommend is that before you do any tutorials with your students, you do this activity. It's called Discovery of DNA. It's not something that I originally wrote. I found it years and years ago in a book called Inductive Biology, and I've been spending years adapting it and improving it. So you can interact with this in a couple of ways. If you're in the classroom with your students, you can just download the thing and give out a paper version of it. Or what you can do is you can use a Google Docs version that's designed for online use, which is what I am doing with my students. And so here's what happens in this. This helps your students, this allows your students to follow the steps that scientists followed over about a 150-year period, maybe more like a 100-year period, as various clues were uncovered, enabling scientists to, first of all, identify DNA as the genetic material, and then finally what the structure of DNA was. So it takes you through some observations of like this algae called acetabularia, which has its nucleus in its stalk over here, and transplantation experiments showed that it was really the nucleus that was determining the phenotype of the single-celled organism. So students read various things, and then they can fill in basically inferences in response to questions that are throughout this. Then we look at how it was uncovered that within the nucleus there was this material nuclein that was there in addition to protein, and that it had this structure with a phosphate group and a nitrogenous base and a deoxyribose sugar, but nobody really knew how the whole thing hung together, and it actually looked more like protein was the informational molecule, not DNA. Anyhow, I don't want to go into the details of this, but I just want to show you this goes through the transforming factor experiment, through experiments that enabled scientists to uncover that DNA was the transforming factor, not protein. The Hershey-Chase experiment, which established that when viruses inject their genes into bacteria, they're injecting DNA and not protein. There's Rosalind Franklin's famous photograph, X-ray crystallography photograph of DNA that was used by Crick and Watson in a very ethically complicated way to discover the structure of DNA. And what I really like about this is there's a Google slideshow that I'm going to open up, and it's a DNA model construction kit. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. There we are. Let's open this up. Come on. Go. Okay, so this first page gives you a little introduction into what it is. And then what students can do is they can drag these pieces around to create a model of the double helix, which, by the way, is not really that different from what Watson and Crick did. You know, they did it with cooler model pieces. But your students will have to create a structure of DNA that corresponds with the evidence that they just learned about. It's a cool activity, and I hope you use that to start your discovery of DNA with your students. So let's go back to Science Music Videos, and let's go to the right spot. So here we are, and we're going back to DNA Structure and Replication in Unit 6. And let me now take you through the tutorials. But actually, before we do that, let me actually show you something else. I think it's a really good practice as an AP biology teacher to work closely with the College Board's course and exam description. And I have a copy of that linked off my website. And not only that, I have a condensed copy of it. But what I've done here is I've just sort of extracted what the sort of super learning objectives are. So you can see what the College Board is expecting you to cover with your students for topic 6.1. DNA is the molecule of heredity in most living systems, though of course RNA can play that role in viruses, as we're learning right now with COVID-19. A little bit of the difference between prokaryotic chromosomes and eukaryotic chromosomes. I cover that a little bit later in the curriculum, and I don't really talk about plasmids until we talk about bacterial genetics, and then again when we do genetic engineering and biotechnology. And then the basic base pairing rules, adenine with thymine, cytosine with guanine, and in RNA you have adenine paired with uracil. For DNA replication, here are the learning objectives that the College Board is encouraging you to get to. DNA replication always occurs in a 5-to-3 direction. The process is semi-conservative, and it involves a whole team of enzymes that the College Board is asking for you to teach your students about. Then the issue of replication on the leading strand and the lagging strand. So how do we help you get there? at sciencemusicvideos.com? Well, we do that through the interactive tutorials that we provide. So we begin with an overview tutorial about DNA. And it just is teaching your students about the importance of DNA and the key processes that DNA is involved in, either directly, replication and transcription, or indirectly by setting the stage for translation. So students will read and then they'll interact. And I'm going to use this feature of teacher previews to show you what the first quiz is like, and what your students will be able to do. They'd be able to identify the chromosomes in a bacterial cell and the various processes that happen in DNA in eukaryotic cells. And they'd have to know that, like, for example, transcription of DNA to RNA, well, that's happening over here. And translation of RNA to protein, well, that's happening. Happening over here. Okay. And again, what I want you to just note is think about your students' experience and think about how great it would be to provide this kind of interactive learning and how much learning it's going to generate. So just question after question about this kind of stuff, and that ends our first tutorial. So now what I'd like you to do is follow me over to the second tutorial, which walks students through DNA structure. And here we learn about the structure of nucleotides, the 4 different nucleotides. Here they are in kind of a cartoony form. A quiz about that, the sugar phosphate backbone, and then really into the deep detailed structure, hydrogen bonding, how those hydrogen bonds form, base pairing, where students learn that A always bonds with T, and T always bonds with A over there, and so on and so forth. And then learning about the dimensions of DNA, an important clue for Watson and Crick as they learned about the double helix, and then another interactive quiz. And again, it's all about the interaction. That's where the magic of sciencemusicvideos.com or learnbiology.com happens for my students and can happen for your students too. And then finally, we go to DNA replication. I teach DNA replication on a big picture level. So, the basic idea of strands separating, each strand acting as a template for a new strand, new nucleotides coming in, and then enzymes sealing the bases between the sugars and the phosphates. And then we go all the way through the beautiful details of how there's a whole team of enzymes that carry that out in eukaryotic, in prokaryotic cells, in all cells. And so students will learn about the differences between DNA replication at the leading strand and the lagging strand, and again, all the enzymes that are involved in the process. I'll show you that video in a second. But again, just think about what it would be like for your students to have this kind of experience where they have to know from memory the bonds that connect complementary nucleotides are, well, those are hydrogen bonds. And again, think about what it would be like if you could sit with your students and just ask them question after question about what they were learning. Well, they would wind up learning a ton. So, and if they put in the wrong answer, as I just did, they'll wind up getting feedback. Now, one more thing that I want to show you about what we do here is that every module on Science Music Videos comes with a student learning guide. So your students aren't just answering questions, they're also doing the very hard, complicated cognitive work of summarizing, labeling, filling in diagrams, really making meaning in writing. And that's fabulous preparation for students to get ready for doing FRQs. And again, your students will learn so much. They'll come to you with so much knowledge. You'll feel so great about the learning that your students have done. Okay, so that takes you through the tutorials on sciencemusicvideos.com, learn-biology.com, related to DNA structure and replication. So, that's homework. What are you going to do with your students when you're with them in the classroom? Well, I already showed you about the discovery of DNA activity, but there's another couple of great things. One thing that I want to show you is that one thing that the College Board wants your students to know about is the Meselson style experiment and the idea of semi-conservative replication. And there's a fantastic activity on HHMI that's called a pulse chase primer experiment. And HHMI has the greatest material, and here's what that activity is like. It's a PDF that you download and you'd go over with your students, and basically it works them through the competing models that existed in the 1950s related to DNA replication and how it happened, and how Meselson and Stahl figured out a beautiful method by which they labeled DNA with radioactive nitrogen, heavy nitrogen, and then used that as a way to ferret out what the actual replication mechanism was. It's been called the most beautiful experiment in biology, and students draw with colored pencils and things like that. I'm not sure how easy it would be to adapt this to a 100% online situation, but I'm going to leave that to you to figure out. I think that's one of the complicated difficulties that we're dealing with. What else is going on? Oh, here in DNA replication, there's a fantastic video that I embedded on my webpage. So here's DNA replication, and if you go right here, the amazing thing is that the models that we use to explain things are vast oversimplifications. So I want you to take some time and show your students this video that shows DNA replication. It's so much more complex than we even teach it in our courses with all the complexity that we show, and it's really worthwhile for students to see that. For a little bit of fun diversion, but a really valuable learning experience too, I want you to note that I have music videos about DNA structure and DNA replication. So here we are in DNA. I have my video DNA Fantastic, and here it goes.
Welcome, I'm so happy you came by for a lesson about the essence of the IOLOGY. DNA is a topic that's so fantastic. We're talking about deoxyribonucleic acid.
Your students will love it, and it'll actually teach your students a ton about biology. There's even a karaoke version that your students can learn to rap themselves. And just to go back to where we came from, I also have a video that explains DNA replication, and in musical form, in rhymed verse, really valuable for students. It's to a salsa beat, and check it out. I think you'll love it. Finally, let's see what else I have to show with you. I posted on my website and in the email that this video goes with a DNA note-taking sheet. And this actually has some stuff about the pulse chase experiment, the Meselson-Stahl experiment, and then many of the diagrams that I have. So you can use this as a way to, help build your students' understanding and work with them. It's just another great activity for them to actually interact with the content. And then in addition to the other resources that I'm offering you, I also want to invite you to share the Google Slideshow that I use for, the direct synchronous instruction that I have with my students. And, this one starts with cell communication. I closed up cell communication and then moved into DNA structure. So if I just sort of show you like the slide over here, you can get a sense of the kind of things that I do when I'm, with my students, which means online with my students. So like, for example, I put together this activity where students work in breakout rooms to, describe all of these various diagrams to one another, answer these questions. Here's the next piece. And then what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll open it up for questions, and I'll, use chat and use discussion with my students to try and make sure that they're deeply understanding. So this is yet another resource that's available to you. So that's pretty much it for this week. It's DNA structure, DNA replication. Those are fantastic activities. Please use the resources on sciencemusicvideos.com and learnbiology.com. It'll help your students' achievement soar. It'll make you feel great about the teaching that you're doing. I hope to see you at one of the meetings that I have on Thursday evenings. And if you're interested in sciencemusicvideos.com and you're not a user, just come on over to sciencemusicvideos.com, click High School Teacher, sign up for a free trial. That'll put you on my weekly email list. You just do it with this button over here. And I just wish you the best in teaching AP Biology. I'm there for you to support you, and look forward to seeing you on sciencemusicvideos.com. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your support and really appreciate your watching this video. Thanks.